Yes, welcome back. This is F a Rap Critic. I'm your boy Malik-16, and no, we're definitely not flexing. Pretty sure it's still a no flex zone. But if you didn't catch that reference to some classic 80s slang and some classic 2000s slang coming together, I'll make it simple for you and remind you that we are talking about the classic album, which is now turned 35 years old, none other than Big Time by Heavy D and the Boys. All right, this is category 2 where we go over the rap performance. I want to take a moment to shout out the homie Namdi from Halftime Chat, which is one of the dopest New Jack era based R&B content channels out there, if not the leading channel for that era of music and everything kind of associated with it. We did a dope branch out interview with Stetsasonic last month. And yeah, man, that's my West African brother you saw in episode 1 when we went over category 1. I had to break out the Liberia t-shirt. That's the Nigerian homie Namdi across the seas in the UK. And I had to rep for Liberia. It's the West African connection. Not quite Liberian Independence Day, but more than likely, probably the very day that this episode airs, it'll be exactly 1 month away from the Liberian Independence Day. So shout out to all West Africans out there, and shout out to anyone that views the channel. This is a global hip-hop community that we are building here, and I appreciate you all being present for it. So if you have not caught that episode 1, category 1 review, do yourself a favor, go check it out. And while you're at it, take a minute to like and subscribe to the channel. We're going to jump right into it. First dimension we talk about in category 2 is dimension 1, personality and charisma. Now, when we're discussing one Dwight Heavy D Myers, we are talking about one of the most memorable standout personalities in hip-hop history, mostly because Heavy D was able to walk this fine line between being very warm but still no joke. And it's not an easy balancing act to pull off in life, let alone in a music career in a field as competitive and just cutthroat as rap, right? But if you've ever watched any documentaries on Heavy D or his unsung episode, you understand that this was kind of his calling card, to be able to bring together some of the most gangster, reputable street dudes around, just family guys and men and women together, and just create a new kind of peaceful vibe everywhere that he went. And so it's always interesting to talk about how that manifests or showcases itself on an audio body of work. Like, we're talking about an album, how do you show personality there? Well, some of that comes through with just direct statements that Heavy D makes. Something that Namdi and I discussed in category 1 when we were going over the hit single, the lead single from this album, We Got Our Own Thing, is that serves pretty much as Heavy D and the Boys' credo. He's all throughout that song making this statement of, don't be on anybody else's time, be on your own time, carve your own lane, and don't be afraid to be yourself. Most of his career, Heavy D is known as the guy that might splash a curse word here and there, but he's not leading with that. And if you're not paying attention, you might not even notice that any curse happened. And certainly that's the case on this album. And there's other ways that he just directly shares his ideologies on things. So on the song Better Land, he kind of gives you his stance on politics. He's like, I don't usually get down with the politics and trickery. I don't get down with fools, and fools, they can't get with me. Simple and plain statement. It's a boundary that he set for himself and that he lives by. He's like, no, I'm not going to take part in the nonsense. I'm not going to allow a lot of nonsense around me. So it's, even though I'm this man of the people, I also have my line, and I'm going to respect you if you respect mine. And, I'm not going to entertain it. And so he furthers that when he doubles down on that same ethos on the line where he says, when I'm in town, don't put me down. Give me a pound. I'm not a ruler or a king, not trying to wear a crown. And this is a sentiment that we've heard shared by rappers like KRS-One when BDP was first coming out, trying to separate themselves from all of the rappers who use monarchy image, right? I'm the ruler, I'm the king, I'm the whatever. He's like, no, I'm a teacher. Hev is doing this, I'm the big man, but I'm still a man of the people. So he's like, let's keep it moving. I don't want you all up on me. Again, I don't want any foolishness around me, but just give me a dap. Like, hey, black man, I see you. Show love. I'll show love back, and we'll both keep it moving. We'll respect each other's spaces. And there's room for everybody. That's kind of a dominant message that Heavy's trying to put out there, even up until the last song. When the last song, Let It Flow, the last rap line on the entire album ends with that song's third verse where he says, "You're welcome any night to come to my stage, because divided we fall, together we get paid." And I'll expound more on that as we go throughout the dimensions, but I thought that was a really interesting statement that you don't hear a lot of rappers saying, because this is the golden era. This is the end of the 80s, and this is one of the first points in the industry where it starts feeling full enough with luminaries for there to be this competitive spirit that is the main topic in hip-hop. There's a lot of cats at this point claiming that top spot, no matter how they're phrasing it, right? To be the leader of the new school, to be the king, whatever it is, everyone's kind of saying they got it. And we're talking about New York still being the biggest focal point of rap. So this is all in one city, everyone going for the same shine, even though there's enough room to share. And that's Heavy's message. He's like, look, there's enough room for all of us. You could be the king, I could be the big man, you could be this, we're good. And I think more than anything, those three examples are how Heavy shows his personality on air, besides just kind of being free with the songs where he's singing and doing the ad-libbing and the sounds that he's become famous for, right? He's free. He wants you to take him serious, but he doesn't take himself too serious enough to be this stuffy, kind of arrogant presence. He's laid back. And he wants his people to shine. He's shouting out his crew on multiple songs. And even when he's shouting them out, he's shouting out characteristics or bragging rights for them. And then he goes back to himself at the end. He's like, me, I'm just laying in the cut. That's Heavy. When he raps about women and relationships, he pulled the greatest feat of not having us doubt for a second. And I don't think Hev gets enough credit for setting that precedent, for being the big man rapping about romance, rapping about women, rapping about being highly adored and coveted and sought by women, and having us all be like, okay, yeah, I can see it, instead of being like, come on, give that man his props. So that is the difference. That is charisma. Anyone can make a relationship song or a song about the opposite sex, but to have us fully buy into it and relate and root for them, that's the charisma part. All those things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about how the personality and charisma was conveyed on this album. Takes us directly to Dimension 2, the suspension of disbelief versus the believability. All right, this is all about process of elimination. Are we suspending disbelief anywhere on here? This is not that kind of album that's asking you to from the onset. It's actually a more grounded album because he wanted you to know who Heavy D and the boys are. Even at its most outlandish, living up to its title track, Big Time, there's not a lot of bragging about material possessions. They mention Nike, mentions his mode of transportation, being able to enjoy some of the finer spoils of being famous, but it's still down to earth because I'm still chilling in Mount Vernon. I'm still chilling in Harlem. So this is very much an album that leans more towards the believe me and not suspension of disbelief. The question always is, how much does Heavy D make us believe him on this album? Well, like I mentioned, he is pointing out local things. The New York vibe is very essential and very important to the landscape that he's presenting on the album, but he's talking about all of New York. As much as he reps Mount Vernon, he's shouting out parts in the Bronx and these other boroughs. And then when he takes it to the reggae, he's shouting out Jamaica. He's shouting out the whole yard, right? And there's enough love to spread to everyone. And that's kind of an ongoing sentiment. He brings his crew in, mentioning your crew and bringing those names to life by your descriptions also makes it real, because these are people. Grap Love is somebody, Rob O is somebody, CL, Pete Rock, Joe Black, like these are people who've been mentioned throughout time. Even his braggadocious claims are just talking about being fly, rocking the party. And to the point that I made in the last dimension about him drawing us in when he's talking about the opposite sex, when he's talking about women, he's bringing you into the process. He's telling you what he did and the results. So whether it's undesirable outcomes, like what he's describing on Somebody For Me, when he's like, I search high and I search low and I came up with nothing, right? He's at least telling you that there was this effort, and this is why he's come to this conclusion that maybe it's not for him and he's just the overweight lover for the rest of his life. On the flip side, you think about a song like Girls They Love Me, he's telling you how he got the number, how he started the conversation with the girl, where they went, how the conversation flowed from there, what they drank, how it escalated, all of that. And it's really the kind of detail that doesn't sound like projected. So I mentioned this before, there's some rappers that know how to talk about women in a way where you can tell they've dealt with women. It's like, oh, the attention to detail is different. It's not this fantasy description. Even though they're painting fictional pictures, they're able to do it with a level of experience and nuance, and more than anything, relatable, right? It's not these impossible scenarios. It's like, no, we were chilling, Anita Baker was on the radio. So yeah, it doesn't get violent. Heavy's not a street-based rapper, despite his connections. So the album never ventures into any territory that would make you question if Heavy is capable of any of what he's talking about, even when he's bragging. But these are all things to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the believability versus the suspension of disbelief. All right, so that takes us to dimension 3, delivery, the use of voice. Okay, delivery, we talk about the heavy dilly 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 d. Delivery is what he does. In the first episode, we went over this briefly, so I'm going to highlight how there are several tones used on this album. Usually we see that when rappers record their albums at different points in their own lives, like when someone's younger and their voice is changing, or someone recorded some songs years before and they changed their delivery style. But with Heavy, you can tell this is just him wanting to showcase these different modalities of himself, not even experiment, even though you can make a case for Easy Does It and You Ain't Heard Nothing Yet, sounding very, very Rakim inspired. I mentioned that in video 1. Give me a second, I'll get right back to that. But you're going to hear him do something that I always credit Jill Scott for doing in a very obvious way. And I always call it, she uses her Big Mama voice on songs like Hate on Me or Golden. And then she uses her kind of sultry, coy, and I have another name for it, I call it the baby slut voice, on her sexual songs or her more seductive songs. And she goes in and out of that. And then she also has a talking voice and, an in-between voice, but she doesn't use that as much. It's usually the Big Mama voice or that little, coy, seductive voice. She stands out because she's one of those artists who usually splits her albums with both. Another example would be Prince, of course. When Prince does his version of a falsetto and then his version of a baritone, most of his albums are going to be split between that. And then he has an in-between voice, a pop alto. But translating that to rap, Heavy does the equivalent on that because he has a big man voice that he uses, and he's really going to emphasize it on songs like More Bounce. He comes in, power! And because of that, that drives a very old school cadence throughout that whole song. In old school, in the sense of you can picture this live show era old school, not so much recorded wax old school, but just like, oh, if I'm given the mic and an old school beat and somebody told me to do something in the 80s, that's probably how I want to rock. That kind of belting out. And I'm leaving my sentences very simple and open because I want you to feel the force of what I'm saying. So he does that on about 4 songs, and then he does this really laid back voice on about 4 of the songs. We got Our Own Thing, the 2 songs that I mentioned, Easy Does It, You Ain't Heard Nothing Yet, and one more. And then in the middle is where all the other songs fall, with the exception of Mood for Love, where he's just singing and breaking out his Jamaican patois accent, right? So that counts as like a bonus, if that makes sense, right? So I'll come back to the point I made about the Rakim influence. There's the argument that was made about EPMD only getting on because Rakim opened the door for this laid back flow to be a thing that was possible in hip hop. So now you have to imagine that seeing Rakim be successful, and then subsequently EPMD, even though they were criticized for being similar to Rakim, that there was probably some murmurs or some push and nudge, some competitive nudges from the industry, from within the industry, to kind of try that style. And when I think about what was going on in 1989 at the turn of the decades, it's possible. I did see a lot of our rappers who before were very boisterous calm down. We're getting more, I'm going back to Cali, I'm the type of guy. These kind of really, let me lower my register kind of voice songs that were not just for the women. It's just like, this is how I'm going to approach it. So it wouldn't be hard for me to believe that there was some kind of, even if it wasn't external pressure, because, again, Heavy is his own person. I don't really see him being easily told what to do for the album. And G-Wiz from The Boys has been in interviews saying they were kind of left to their own creative devices. There wasn't a lot of meddling from the label. So maybe a little internal competitive pressure, like I could do that. And then when we factor in, Marley being one of the producers on here, probably having some influence, if you're prone to believe that producers like to throw suggestions in there, and if the producer holds a little weight in the industry, a little bit more weight than the rapper, that their suggestion may be heeded more than someone up and coming. And it's like, hey, approach it like this. So that's a fair balance. If you split that album up in thirds, with one of those tracks being a wild card, this reggae highlight, that is vocal dexterity. At no point does it sound like any of those are outside of who Heavy D is, not extensions of himself, and that he's really like sitting down saying, let me become this. On top of the fact that Heavy is doing ad-libs and sounds, like he's doing popular dancehall style chants like ring ding ding a ding, or diddly diddly zunga zang. And on the hype track, More Bounce, he's going ooh ooh in between. Like, he's not shy to add a little pizzazz or a little hype to his own songs with that freedom to do that. And all these things were popular in the 80s. So it may sound a little like, what if you're hearing this for the first time in this era? But back then, it was the common thing to hear those kind of sounds on records. So all these things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. It takes us to dimension 4, the flow. All right, I mentioned the flow on More Bounce being open and simple, but there's a point where he's doing more of a compressed syllable style, and he's picking up a little. He starts spelling his name, and there's more of a flip to it. Another popular style coming out of the 80s into the 90s. Yeah, it's the third verse that's wordier. But there's songs where he does more deliberate things with flow. So the final song, Let It Flow, is the quickest pacing of his rapping throughout the whole album. I know We Got Our Own Thing is fast because of the beat, but he's really bouncing on that beat. Everybody, move your body. It's a simple, easy to follow pattern built off of the bass line of that groove. Let It Flow, he's actually flowing. He's spitting. He's fast over that drum kick and rhyming in pockets in between it, which is really something for 1989. This is more in the vein of Big Daddy Kane and Kool G Rap, and the rappers whose go-to style were to be faster and have more syllables. Whereas he does the exact opposite on Somebody For Me and does his most spaced out, easy to digest flow, which is also a little unprecedented because it's more of a talk style with a rhythm, and it works. And like, he takes pregnant pauses and ellipses in his structure, and this is a style that we'd see him revisit on things like the Living Color theme song. He's like, take it from me, it's fine to be. It's a definite melody, but those spaces give it gravitas, actually. It's because it's just like, it's so planned that it's pretty well thought out writing. All right, so the most intricate flow pattern you're gonna get is on You Ain't Heard Nothing Yet. All throughout, he's doing carryover rhymes that fall off the landing bar and roll into the next thing. It's simple versions of it, but he does it so much on the song that it's really impressive. And he's, even from the first line, tic tac toeing, 3 in a rowing, he didn't have to say the end, but to keep that going is it creates a continuous kind of cascade effect, because he could have said tic tac toe, 3 in a row. He wanted to go with the measures of the Mr. Magic sample, the boom, boop, boop, boop. Because it does that, he added the extra syllable for the end. And he does that in more intricate spaces, like when he spells his name out in that sequence where he goes, the HEAVYD sin, this is my yard, better yet my precinct. And then he switches it up in the second verse 2 times and does 2 popular 80s flow patterns within seconds of each other. Oh, fuck, wait, no, and then he does this thing where he's rhyming a bunch of syllables. He's like, in that rap, the format, that, going from that pattern to that pattern and then back to the pattern he was already rapping in with some carryover elements with certain lines. There was a lot of thought put into that. That's why it wouldn't be hard for me to believe that he was like, oh, y'all like that? Y'all like that Rakim EPMD style? Watch this. You ain't heard nothing yet. I can do that too. I can impress you with the syllables but laid back, and I can do the big voice and open style. So you're getting a showcase of different flows here. On Easy Does It, he does a stutter pattern on the second verse of that song. Something that, you know, rappers, again, just started playing with on Wax. It was impressive, you know, when Big Daddy Kane said, even if I stutter. And so what Heavy does is it does an extension of that and does it all throughout that second verse, even down to the last line, like catch up, catch up, or catch up. He's playing with it. He's like different parts of that verse. So impressive. You know, I know he said we're not flexing at the beginning of this video, but he's flexing structural dexterity and different styles and patterns all throughout this album. One thing you can never accuse Heavy of is not having flow. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 5, the wordplay and bar intent. There's a few clever things that Heavy does on here. He's not going for any awards for most witty. He wants to be understood. He wants to be straightforward and relatable. There's instances of sparse, clever wordplay here, but, you know, nothing mind-blowing on. We got our own thing. He says something like, flipping on the mic makes me a rapping acrobat. Okay. And then on You Ain't Heard Nothing Yet, he calls the competition turtleneck rappers. He's to all turtleneck rappers. And something to point out on You Ain't Heard Nothing Yet, to again belabor this point about the Rakim similarity. He uses the word phrasing of ditech, which I pointed out in my review of Paid in Full. That's a very specific 5% word that Rakim, I think, put on the map in the rap lexicon, even though it might have been said on the streets like that among that crowd. He's the first one. Dot text the temples like a red alert. He said it all throughout the Paid in Full album. So for Heavy D on the track where he sounds like him to kind of do this internal rhyme built flow pattern where he's like tech and say tech in it, you're not helping that avoidance of that comparison. But maybe it's only me who's pointed this out. He's got elements of humor in there, but it's very subtle. It's not. He's got elements of humor in there, in a clown the competition way, but again, not in any obvious way where it's like to really embarrass you. It's just to kind of shoo you away, like get out of here. So on Let It Flow, he says, "Now who said I ain't dope? You're walking a tightrope, searching for high hopes. I wonder what you smoke." And that's about the extent of wordplay. I take it back to we got our own thing. He does this on More Bounce too, where he, kind of ends each of his verses with the word pounce, just so he can say more bounce. But that seems more just like easily convenient thing, as opposed to there's a tongue-in-cheek element to what he did on We Got Our Own Thing, where he ends the first verse and the third verse with the statement of started with a pow and now we end it with a bang. I'm like, okay, because the bang and the pow usually follow each other. I'm like, okay, that's a little something. Or, his comparative kind of imagery. You're a chicken McNugget and I'm a Big Mac. Lots of intent in the bars, especially when he's just making straightforward statements, like saying, be yourself, or talking about how he doesn't want to get into drama and how he avoids it. But not a lot of wordplay to get those points across. He prefers the straightforward route. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 6, the overall quotability of this album, the punchlines or poetic wisdom. All right, I can tell you right now that Chicken McNugget and Big Mac is probably the closest punchline you're going to get. There's one line on Let It Flow where he says, "You're soft as a sandbag, throw your rhyme in a glad bag." Okay. I don't know how punchliney that is. It's probably I wonder what you smoke is more punchliney than that one on that same song. I mean, he delves into some territory that would be seen as, clutch my pearls or, shock face, and probably brought up on Twitter to stir some controversy by some youngins in nowadays climate. Because on the track More Bounce, surprisingly, he uses the F word, not that F word, but the other F word, in a punchline kind of rhyme where he's saying, like in jail, you'll be happy as hell. Ironically, on the same song later on in the third verse, he goes and says something like, not a bisexual, and I'm like, I wonder what that was. It's a clear statement. It's not a punchline, but it's interesting that they wind up on the same track. And back then it meant absolutely nothing. He was just making a reference and telling you what he's not. But in today's climate, it's homophobic, it's all these other things. So very interesting that didn't age that way and is associated with the rapper who is seen as one of the friendlier, less judgmental rappers. And it probably bears true as he got older and, the circles he navigated and the people whose lives he touched. But y'all forget he's also a yard man and a New Yorker. And it's the 80s, man. No one wears a halo. That's why you'll hear more on the poetic wisdom side of things. I already pointed out some of his ideological thinking markers that he sprinkles throughout the album. On Mood for Love, he's running off all of the cliches of the day that you'll hear in most classic reggae songs from the old school. If you spit in the sky, it'll land in your eye. And then you never miss the water till the well runs dry. How many times have you heard that? So a lot of the reggae sayings, all the cliches, probably right before they became cliches, Heavy is like running them off on that Mood for Love song. On Better Land, which is the song where I think he gets the deepest, you can extract this idea from the album. This is really abstract, critical thinking here, But there is a legitimate concern about hip hop being seen as viable, giving credibility, and living long and continuing to thrive. And Heavy is at the forefront of that concern because he makes mention of it. I talked about what he said on the end of Let It Flow, like, look, my stage is your stage, because he begins that verse by saying, rappers, we remain the same, but still some complain about the fame that we obtain. And he's like, look, I work hard to get this. I know what I got in this for. Don't mess this up for everybody else. That's what that whole verse is kind of getting across there. And then on Better Land, he makes this statement about, well, look here, guess what happened? A fight at a concert and they blamed it on rapping. Don't you have anything else better to do than to diss rap and the things that we do? And this is that point where hip hop started having arena tours and big concerts, and when fights broke out, it would really ruin the rep and the money, because it's making front page headline news, especially in a city like New York, because it was almost like J. Jonah Jameson, the Spider-Man. You're like, I told you this hippity hoppity stuff that these degenerate youths are into is gonna ruin the nation. To some extent, there was some foreshadowing there, right? But by and large, we knew hip hop, especially back then, wasn't this destructive force. And that was Heavy's point. He's like, look, we're not out here trying to cause trouble. Trouble may happen at places. Unfortunately, that's a song that Heavy was singing most of his career, as some other things came up. So yeah, it's not an overt concern, but it's an underlying concern if you care to really abstract that theory from what you're hearing. I think it's pretty obvious. No one knew what the 90s was going to look like for hip hop based on how the 80s had looked. All we knew is that it was bigger than it was. It had potential, but there are enough elements that were growing that could mess it up for everybody. And this was a good run. So it's like, don't mess up the money, y'all. We can all do this together. And so, yeah, there's statements like that where he sounds like he's defending it. You also hear the concern. And then to drill the point home about Heavy being more of a poetic wisdom rapper, he tells you himself that he's about having that kind of food for thought in his process, even if it's not in the raps. Just he wants to be able to touch others. So we got our own thing. Again, the first song off the album, he says, a cutie down in front said, Heavy, you're my hero. Understand this before you make a comment. There's always a meaning in a Heavy D statement. So he wants you to know that. He wants you to think when you listen to his songs. He wants you to be able to take away something of importance, of value from it. Even though that wasn't a rhyming line, that was a lazy bar. The poignancy of him wanting you to zero in on that is what saves it. It's like, listen, understand this before you make a comment. I'm gonna make this clear. So credos all throughout, not the deepest, most complex messaging at all, but it's splashed in here. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5. Heartbeats, that takes us to dimension 7. The concepts. Okay, this is not a concept album. This is just Heavy D and the boys letting you know that they're out for the gold this time. They're going for the gusto, big time. So Better Land by default is going to fall into conceptual territory just because it follows that model for the umpteenth time in the 80s of what we've talked about with a couple of 80s albums already this year alone. This If I Ruled the World, let's go away to this better place, let's reshape the world in this image, that idea. So Better Land follows that, and he doesn't paint the picture as well as a lot of the others who've come before him, but it's still that idea, but it's very, it's not thorough. It's not thoroughly executed. Everything else is pretty straightforward. If he's flexing, he's flexing. If the girls love him, the girls love him. If he's in the mood for love, he's in the mood for love. You ain't seen nothing yet. You ain't seen nothing yet. And if he's letting it flow, then he's letting it flow. Like, pretty straightforward for the remainder of the album. Yeah, so it's up to you if you consider that a weakness when you're thinking about the idea that most classic rap albums have a good concept that makes you go, oh, wow, that was different. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to the content dimensions. Dimension 8, externalized content. How much is Heavy talking about things outside of his internal monologue, his inner world? Let's talk about his outer world. Um, yeah, Better Land is where it kind of begins and ends. That's his only song that is on a straight topic about things in the world. I mean, he's still giving you his thoughts on things. He's still putting himself in the scenarios, like when he mentions, stepped on my foot, and for that, you feel like a brother's life should be took. He's putting himself in it just to, again, make it relatable, but he's talking about a broader um, set of happenings that affect people who look like him, people who indulge in hip hop, people from the cities. And I mentioned that he does some variation of that on the song Flexing. For the third verse, he's talking about how some drama started outside the party that he was rocking, just to make the braggadocious point that he was rocking the party, but he's still describing things happening outside as an extension of things that happen in the urban world. But that's really it. He's not sparing a lot of time to discuss these things. You get a little bit more, you probably get equal on Dimension 9, the internalized content. We got our own thing, and Somebody for Me, ironically, the two hit singles from this album are the songs where he's talking about his inner feelings. Like, hey, this is what works for me. You should do the same. You should be yourself. And also, here's what's not working for me. I want love. I'm having trouble finding love now that I'm more famous and people know me. I love being Heavy D, but man, it would be nice to have someone who was down before I was as, well known as I am. How do I know if they're there for me or my status? And that's it. Yeah, you get the sprinkles of it in Better Land. Big Time, he's explaining who the group is. He breaks down every member. He's like, Eddie F's the DJ, G Wiz, and Trouble T Roy. That's what makes up me and the boys. And, this is why we're Big Time. This is what we do. But nothing deeper than that. Heavy D is not the one to go into like super duper reflection. All of that is something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the content, external and internal. That takes us to the final dimension, Dimension 10, storytelling. The most linear storytelling you're getting on this album is Girls They Love Me, where you're setting up the scenario in each verse on how he's interacting with the woman. That's it. Each verse is like a vignette. It's not a part 1 in the verse 1 and part 3 the story wraps up in the third verse. Is not like that. Each verse is independent of the other, all to the same point that the girls love him. and this is how he does it. I told you, he mentioned the story element on the third verse of Flexin'. Yeah, he's speaking from a past tense narrative with the Somebody for Me, but I mean, those are very short verses. But as always, that is up to you to determine if it is a make or break element on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. And with that concludes the Category 2 review of the classic album by Heavy D and the Boys, Big Time. 35-year-old classic. Rest in peace to one of my favorite rappers of all time since I was a kid. Gone way too soon, but definitely not forgotten. And that wraps this episode up. I'll see y'all on the next one. Until next time, y'all know what it is. F a rap critic. They talk about it while I live it. Word to mess.